This movie is on the Save As dialog box, and there is a whole lot of functionality in this dialog box. We're going to be able to search for a location if we don't already know where we want to save our file. There's a breadcrumb trail that's left behind in that we can go backwards and forwards to go through the directory string to find the location. We can manage our files, move them around, rename them, delete them. We can set up folders, new folders if we want to. We can establish and set up properties and get to the advanced property settings. We can determine the file type that we want to use when we save the worksheet. There's a Tools drop-down menu that allows us to map a network drive, establish some web options when we're saving our worksheet as a web page. We can set up a password, and we can compress the pictures that are contained within the workbook. And finally, we can save the workbook so that we have an icon that has a thumbnail, which is a picture of the workbook itself. And that will determine what the icon will look like, and we can change some of the icon settings as well. So the Save As dialog box, you're going to want to save your worksheet frequently, especially if you're working within an unstable system. I've gotten into the habit of saving my worksheet every time I make a change that I know I want to keep. The quickest way to do that is to press CTRL S, and it will save your workbook with the same name and the same location. All the settings will be the same. But if you want to have more options when you're saving your workbook, you can pull up the Save As dialog box by pressing Alt-F-A. I'm going to escape out of that because you can also pull it up by pressing F12, function 12. At the top, we have some search capabilities. If we don't know where we want to save our file, but we are aware that maybe we're looking for a particular folder, or we want to save the new file with a file that we already have saved, we just don't know where it is, there's some search capabilities that you can access, and Excel will find whatever it is that you're searching for, the file or the folder. We also get displayed a breadcrumb trail sort of thing where we can go backwards or forwards and choose sequentially where we want to go to save our file. We can manage our files and folders. Once we select a file, I'll have to select one. I'll select book 1. We can then move the file by cutting it and pasting it to a new location. We can copy the file. We can delete the file. We can rename the file. And if we want to, we can set up a new folder by left-clicking New Folder. I'll escape out of that. We can also establish properties and change properties. And the property options that you get will be determined by what it is you selected when you launch the Property Options dialog box. I'm going to left-click off of this and select a file, left-click the Organize drop-down, and left-click Properties. And the properties I'll be establishing in this case is for Book 1. I can change security settings. I can change the value of the properties. And I can access previous versions of the workbook. I'm going to cancel out of that. And alternatively, if I select a folder, I'll be able to change the properties of that folder because that's what's displayed in the Property Settings dialog box. The other place that you can access some of the properties, assuming it's one of these 3 properties you want to deal with, is on the dialog box itself, where authors, tags, and title is listed. These properties will be explained in another movie. We can also determine the file type, and these file types were covered in another movie, but you can select any item on this list and save your current workbook in one of these file types. I'm going to close that. There's a Tools drop-down menu that allows us to map the network drive. We can establish web options if we're saving our workbook or our worksheet as a web page. I'm going to cancel out of that. We can go to General Options, which is to allow us to set up a password either to open or to modify the workbook. I'm going to cancel out of that. The last option is to compress pictures, which will reduce the file size. 2 more things we can do. The first thing affects the second thing, so I'll show you the first one first. We can save the file as a thumbnail, and when you do that, there's a little picture that's taken of the worksheet that's displayed in the icon that we can control with another setting that we'll get to in a second. When I have the option Save Thumbnail selected, and I save the workbook, I'm going to Alt-F-A to get that dialog box again, and I'm going to say No Thumbnail the second time, and deselect the Save Thumbnail and save this workbook. And now the second option comes into play, which is the ability to adjust the icons. There's my two workbooks that I just saved, No Thumbnail and Thumbnail. And when I left-click this option, I can choose to show some icons. I'll show some medium icons. When you save the workbook using the Save Thumbnail option, it takes a picture of the workbook and then adds, of course, the Excel icon to the lower right-hand corner of the picture. When there isn't any thumbnail, you get a standard-looking icon that will look the same for any workbook. And there are some other options, some other display options, in that you can control the size of the icon that's displayed. You can show some more details about the file size, the date modified, or fewer details. So there's some other display options when this dialog box lists the files and folders for you. So that's the Save As dialog box. The Save As dialog box has a lot of functionality. You can search for a location to save your file in. You can follow the breadcrumb trail forwards and backwards to search for a location to save your file. You can manage your files and folders. You can rename them, cut them, paste them, delete them, set up new folders. We also have access to a wide range of properties in a dialog box and ready access to change the properties for the author, the tags, and the title of the workbook. When we save the file, we can determine the file type. We have some tool options where we can map a network drive, select some web options if we're saving our workbook as a web page. We can set a password up, and we can compress pictures if we have some in the workbook. And finally, we can save a thumbnail or not of the document and then control the icon that's displayed in the dialog box and whether we display some detail information or not with the files.